There's a new brilliant article out today from Charlotte Alfred that really puts in perspective the ISIS situation in Iraq and what a possible long-term solution might be. So when you listen to the media today or you listen to the politicians today, they all just seem to be focused on these short-term nonsensical ideas with no actual end goal. It's just, bomb! Attack in Syria, attack in Iraq, keep bombing in Yemen and Somalia. I don't know, more ground troops, and we'll not call them ground troops. So those are all just not bright ideas. So you and I should dig into the details here instead and not listen to those idiots. And again, credit to Charlotte Alfred for this because this is incredible. She explains, quote, ISIS, ironically, has strong alliances with members of the former dictator Saddam Hussein's Baath regime, and its highest ranks are filled with former Saddam loyalists. So, for those of you who don't know the history of Iraq, that's actually very strange because for all of Saddam's faults, and he had many, quote, Baathism is fundamentally a secular pan-Arab movement. He was a secular dictator. So, they really aren't on board with the overall goal of ISIS. They just happen to be two Sunni groups. They continue, quote, this is not a natural alliance, Brian Fishman, a counterterrorism expert at the New America Foundation, told the World Post. While the Islamic State, formerly known as Isil or ISIS, wants to create a religious regime across national borders, the Baathists want to reassert the power they had before the 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq. But they both claim to champion Sunni interests in opposition to former Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki's autocratic and sectarian leadership. So, what does that mean? That is very important. That's why they got together, to oppose the Shiites. So Shiites in Iraq, they make up about 60% of the population. And the government, after Saddam, as I'm sure you've heard the media say, the U.S. de-Baathified the government. So they got rid of the Sunni Baathists, and the Shiites took over. They are 60% of the country. They basically run the government. And then we basically flipped the repression. It used to be that the Shiites and the Kurds were repressed by Saddam and the Sunnis and the Baathists, and then it became the Shiites suppressed the Sunnis and the Kurds. So we just changed one form of bad leadership for another form of bad leadership, and that explains why ISIS, which are Sunni extremists and jihadists, have at least temporarily teamed up with the Baathists, who are also Sunnis, but they're relatively secular. But here's the most important part, quote, the pragmatic alliance has been a major force in helping the Islamic State achieve its goals. When the group seized a string of cities in Iraq earlier this year, it was the former generals of Saddam's army who provided much of the military expertise. The Islamic State's extremism, however, is now causing rifts in the alliance, with Baathist and Islamic State fighters competing for dominance. In July, a group of former Saddam followers released a statement denouncing the persecution of minorities. That is absolutely fascinating. So again, there hasn't been clear evidence ever that this group of Sunnis, the Baathists, do not have the long-term goal of staying with ISIS and living under a caliphate. That's not what they want to do. Now, here's the conclusion, quote, the Baathists have a lot of blood on their hands. They are no shrinking violets, hard word. The difference is their goals are more secular and nationalist. They will certainly torture and kill, but they want support from minority groups and tribal groups. The rift between former Saddam cronies and the religious insurgents may be America's best chance to weaken the Islamic State. So, how do we capitalize off of this information, which, by the way, I'm almost embarrassed to say I didn't know this, it didn't occur to me, I didn't think of it. I didn't stop and piece the things together and realize that Saddam was a Sunni and he had Sunni support when he was the ruler of Iraq. And what are those Sunnis doing now? Because ISIS has taken over Sunni portions of Iraq. What are they doing? I didn't know. I didn't think about it. What did they? Were they some of the people who dropped their guns and ran when ISIS came? Are they fighting ISIS, or are they fighting alongside ISIS? What is it? I didn't think about it. And the reality is they teamed up with ISIS, but they didn't really want to team up with ISIS. So how do we capitalize off of this? Well, when the common enemy is gone, they'll turn against each other. It's that simple. When you get rid of the common enemy, that would be the Shiites, the Baathists and the jihadists, the ISIS people, they're gonna turn against each other. And then when they do that, we support the Baathists with humanitarian aid and give them an edge over the jihadists. And look, all we have to do at that point is sit back and watch, because at that point, you'll have certain factions of the FSA, the Free Syrian Army, fighting ISIS. You're going to have Assad still fighting ISIS. You're going to have Iranian Shiite militias fighting ISIS. And you'll have the Baathists, who are other Sunnis, secular Sunnis, fighting ISIS. It would be the perfect storm to crush ISIS. But how do we get to that point? Okay, how do we get there where we can really exacerbate that rift between the two and make it so that there's all-out war between the Baathists and ISIS? You break up Iraq. That's all you got to do. So you give the Shiites their own area. Some are scared that, oh, we can't do that. It might be swallowed up by Iran. Maybe, maybe not. Either way, honestly, I don't really care. Either way, okay? They would rather be in an alliance that way than be part of Iraq. Iraq is not a country anymore. It's not a natural country. It was created in fucking 1932. This isn't a real country. The borders were drawn on a map by Britain. It's absurd. There were the ethnic, cultural, religious identities. They don't connect. So split it up, okay? So you give the Shiites their portion, the Sunnis their portion, the Kurds their portion, break it up into 3 countries, and then what happens? Well, when you split up, when you say, okay, here's your sovereign territory, here's your new countries, what happens? You're going to have the Sunnis, who are the Baathists and secular, looking at ISIS and they go, well, who's going to control our region? Because it's the Sunni territory, they're both Sunnis, who's going to lead in that region? You're going to have to duke it out, son. And if we support the Baathists in that respect, when that happens, they will crush ISIS for this reason. Because it wouldn't just be the Baathists versus ISIS. It would be the Baathists and the Shiites and the FSA, factions of the FSA in Syria and Assad in Syria, all going against ISIS, and boom, game, set, match. So at that point, you would have a Baathist, more secular Sunni country, a Kurdistan, and a Shiitistan, a Shiite country, and taken care of. Now, that's how you intelligently solve problems overseas. What makes more sense? Doing what I just described, or we're going to go in there, we're going to bomb everybody, attack in Syria, attack in Iraq, and put boots on the ground and stuff, anger, missiles, bombs. But what's your end goal? You don't have an end goal. There's no point where you go, okay, I think we won now, guys, because you're just saying bomb for the sake of bombing. Now, to be clear, are there some circumstances where I would support bombing? Yes, like I've described before, the Yazidis on the mountaintop. So what do I think should have been done there? I think the U.S. government should have went through NATO and through the UN and through Congress, because Article 1, Section 8 says you have to do that. You have to get declaration of war from Congress. And you get approval from all those different areas, so you comply totally with international law and domestic law. And then they'll say, sure, and then you go and you do the humanitarian aid for the Yazidis. But if it's not humanitarian, then I'm out. If it's just a conflict between two sides, I'm out, right? But if it's a pure right and wrong genocidal situation where it's like the Yazidis versus ISIS, then we'll help out. But that's the only time I'd be okay with doing limited attacks and with international support and with the international community. Outside of that, the solution is what I just gave you, not this nonsense of just attack now and ask questions later. I'm sure that'll work because it always worked so well in the past.